In the quiet stretch of a cold frontier morning, where the snow lay scattered like torn pages of winter's diary, young Eliza stood with a basket of bright red apples pressed gently against her apron, her small hands pink from the crisp air as she waited outside the family's log cabin, knowing that every little thing she did mattered now more than ever. She was only 10, but since her father's passing the previous spring, she had taken it upon herself to help her mother and younger sister, Clara, manage the chores that once belonged to stronger hands, and though the cabin was old and weather-beaten, she carried an inner light that made the world around her look less harsh, a quiet courage that even the wandering cold could not dim. While behind her Clara carefully inspected her own empty basket, hoping to gather firewood before the daylight slipped away again, and near the fence stood Sheriff Dalton, an old family friend and one of the few people who checked on them regularly, leaning slightly against the rough wooden rails with a thoughtful gaze, his leather gloves tightening as if the winter wind reminded him of responsibilities that went deeper than the badge he wore, for he had known Eliza's father long ago and felt a silent promise tug at him every time he saw the widow's children trying so hard to shoulder burdens far too large for their small frames. Eliza looked up only when the sheriff cleared his throat, offering a warm nod of approval at the apples she had gathered from the last surviving tree in their orchard, a tree her father once tended with such patience that it became a symbol of hope for them all, and though the fruit was fewer this year, it felt like a gift, proof that the land still remembered kindness, still answered faith with something sweet, and Eliza felt proud as she explained that she planned to trade the apples at Miller's store for flour and oil so her mother could bake bread for the week, determined not to let anyone think they were helpless just because times were hard. The sheriff listened quietly before telling her that the roads were icy and the trade wagons were arriving late, so he offered to ride along beside her with his horse to make sure she reached town safely, and even though she insisted she could manage, the gentle firmness in his voice made her understand that accepting help wasn't weakness, especially when it came from someone who truly cared, and as her mother stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a worn cloth with gratitude in her eyes, she thanked him for looking after the children the way he had been doing ever since the spring storms had taken her husband, though no one ever spoke of that day because the memory was still heavy enough to make hearts tremble in silence. The wind carried the soft creaking of the barn door and the distant calls of winter birds as Eliza took a deep breath, steadying herself with the thought that even in small acts, gathering apples, carrying baskets, preparing for a journey, she was keeping her father's teachings alive, for he had always told her that strength wasn't loud or hard, but steady and kind, and as she walked toward the fence with her basket, she felt the sheriff gently rest his hand on the wood beside her, promising that he would not let anything happen to them under his watch, not while breath still filled his lungs or the snow still fell on their land. Clara caught up, clutching her empty basket and looking admiringly at her sister, knowing Eliza carried not just apples but the heart of their family, and even the sheriff noticed how the young girl's quiet determination gave warmth to the cold morning, making the place feel less lonely, less forgotten. Together they set off down the path that curved through the frozen fields, the sheriff's horse crunching the icy ground behind them, Eliza's braids swaying softly as she walked, and though the world was still recovering from loss, the three of them moved forward with an unspoken understanding that healing often began in moments like these, simple, ordinary journeys shared with people who refused to let you walk alone, while the cabin behind them stood sturdy against the winter wind, a reminder of the family they were holding together piece by piece, day by day, with courage, kindness, and the quiet hope that brighter seasons would return to the frontier once again.